In this video I will be showing all the rollout spots for Wigglytuff that I was able to find in Remote Stadium. But first I wanna give you a couple tips how to use this ability before I go actually into the rollout spots, so hear me out. Number 1. Remote Stadium is symmetrical. As you can see, the map splits from the middle section and the layout is symmetrical. So if there is a good rollout spot in the left side of the map, you can mirror that to the right side of the map as well. The second point is that rollout can be cancelled except within the bouncing animation. So if you got your angle bad, you can always cancel the rollout so you won't go into those terrible directions and positions. Number 3 is that you have to be careful with corners. If your rollout is going to hit a corner, it can redirect you to awkward places. Sometimes they can be beneficial and sometimes they can get you killed, so careful with those. And the next thing I want to talk about is that your positioning and where you actually aim the rollout is very important, and it's going to determine the final outcome where you're actually going with this ability. So even a small mistake can make the rollout fail, so you need a lot of practice to get this consistently. You also want to keep in mind that no matter what you do with rollout, you are going to have a maximum of 5 bounces per rollout. This ability also has 10 seconds cooldown, and the cooldown starts when the rollout animation has been finished. There's also this little off-topic thought that came to my mind. There are these controllers that have these knobs, so you can aim either straight up or straight right. For example, I don't have this type of controller because it costs a lot of money to actually get these customized, but you could utilize a controller like this with Wigglytuff's rollout and get those angles more consistently. And the last point is that eject button can be used to extend rollout. This is usually risky because eject button has a high cooldown, but you also want to keep this in mind because there are spots in the map that can be utilized with eject button as you're able to extend the rollout duration. So now let's talk about the actual rollout spots. I start with more of the easier ones and I progress to the harder parts later on. So let's begin. So first we have the casual lane rollout. This is very useful in the laning phase, and you can adjust the angle in many different directions. You want to try avoid going straight because it can be easily dodged due to the distance between these two walls, and there are these corners as well, so it can go into weird positions, and sometimes the rollout jitters in the wall, so it goes into the opposite direction as well. You can use eject button here to extend the rollout duration to get you further, which can work situationally, but it's also risky because it'll consume the eject button. Next we have this corridor over here, and it's also a really good place to roll out if you can stack up enemies here. Not too difficult, and there are different angles you can approach this corridor as well. With eject button you can even do this tricky one that you first bounce on these two walls and then you go to the smaller corridor next to it, which will extend it. Then we have this very simple going to lane rollout. This is very easy to pull off, and you can get to lane faster by using it. Ideally you would like to get a rollout from this small gap, but the bounce is really hard to get, so I would not recommend it. Then we have this rollout next to the first goal. This is very useful, and you can even bounce on from this angle, but it's difficult. This is really good if your team tries to score, so you can get 2 knockups in a quick succession, so very useful overall. Then we have this tight corridor around the Zapdos area, and this is very useful if you're having a team fight over here, or if you're trying to zone the enemy players from taking the Zapdos. Super useful, and it's usually pretty easy to pull off. Also this mini corridor close to Lillipup, and it's a bit trickier to do, but you can get a lot of bounces here as well. Then we have some rollout spots close to the base. These can be useful too because you can get that double bounce, and they're not super difficult to execute. You just need to find that right angle to pull it off. So next we have this corridor near the Dreadnought. This is also very useful because the distance between these two walls is kind of short, and there are a lot of variations you can do by using the rollout here. You can also extend this rollout with the eject button, which enables you to go to the other side, so it can be useful sometimes. Then we have this rollout spot close to the second goal. These are a bit trickier because the angle is curved, but they can be pulled off and you can get a lot of value here when done correctly. But it's a bit trickier one to execute. Next we have this tight little corridor that you can go left and right, back and forth. This is harder because the wall is pretty tight, so you don't have much room for error, but it can be done and you can get a lot of value with this as well. Just be careful with your positioning and how you're going to put that specific angle. Between these two rocks, it's near impossible. Then we have this upward position angle, and this is a bit easier than the last one because there is a bit more space to work with. There are also variations and angles you can pull with this off. And yeah, you can even extend this with eject button as well to do these tricky ones. Then we have this tight corridor over here, also a great place to pull enemies in. Again, there are a lot of different angles you can approach this corridor, and the more complex your angle is, the harder it is for the enemy to react to this. You want to keep that in mind as well. There are easier variations and there are more difficult variations. It just depends how many bounces you will pull off. So that will determine the difficulty overall. Then we have this little odd spot next to the Zapdos pit. This can be useful too, but this is a tricky one to pull off. But you can get these neat bounces here as well. Then we have this angled corridor over here, which I like actually. It's a bit trickier to pull off and you can even get stuck like that. But if you can bait enemies over here, super useful overall. Then we have these couple side lane rollouts. These are very situational, but they can be useful sometimes. But they're also really hard to pull off, consistently at least. Especially this one with the Corphish. This is like super difficult to pull off. But it's very satisfying, no doubt. Next we have this Bouffalant and Ludicolo pit rollouts. These are very specific and there are a lot of variations where you can actually go with rollout. So don't get discouraged if you fail the first or second or even the third time, but just try to get the idea from this footage where you have to be, how do you want to position yourself to actually get the angles right. But if you have a little fight going on in this pit, this is actually going to be very useful. Then we have some Dreadnought rollouts. You got the classic downwards one, then you have this sort of a triangle shape. And a lot of variations again you can do here, which are pretty useful if you can nail these consistently. But they are more or less difficult, no doubt. Then we have these Rotom spots. These I feel are kind of niche because of the usefulness factor of them. But you can do these bounces back and forth if you can have that angle and positioning correctly. But again, I feel like these are very hard to pull consistently, so you need to have some practice before you really starting popping off with this. Then we have the Zapdos pit. You can get decent rollouts here, even without the extra top wall when the Zapdos is up. You can utilize that as well, but you can do rollouts even without that. There are a lot of variations again you can pull off, and they can be useful during the Zapdos fight for sure. And for the final part, I'm showing you a couple bonus rollouts that I was able to find. They are more or less situational, but they can be handy at times, and I thought to myself, I want to show them anyways, because you can then know that hey, these angles do exist as well. So here we go. There's this little bounce you can do from this wall, and I was able to get this Lucario because of the double bounce. Very useful. Then there's this little gap, insanely hard to pull the rollout, because you can't get between the two walls easily. It'll just bounce off, but it can work from time to time. Then I found this really tricky dicky one between the first and the second go, and it's really hard to pull off. But it could have some niche usage. Then I found this one between Zapdos and the enemy base, and the rollout actually goes backwards, but it's super insane to pull off. Very, very difficult. Then there is this little neat rollout, which requires a eject button, that you can extend that duration a bit longer. Very situational. And the last one I have is that you have to go on the edge of this bush and actually start the rollout, and then immediately eject button the top side, which has that nice surprise factor in it, which could work situationally as well. Okay, so that was the list of rollouts I was able to find. If you have any rollout spots that I missed, let me know down in the comments or come to my Discord channel, links in the description, and come show me. I want to see, I'm very curious to see, are there any other good spots in Remote Stadium? And with that said, this took a lot of time to put together, so a thumbs up will be appreciated. And thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.